Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year, and welcome to the next Learn with Lorna. We'll get started in just a minute. Hi, Penny. So yeah, welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna. My name, as many of you will know, is Lorna Steele, and I'm the Community Engagement Officer for the Highland Archive Service. Happy New Year. It seems extraordinary to me that it's just been a week since we spoke. It seems like a huge amount has happened across the world. So very strange that it was only a week ago, but I hope you had a pleasant new year, and we're moving into hopefully a more positive year of good things happening. Thank you to all of you who tuned in last week as well. Last week's film has had about 5,000 views, so obviously people looking for things to do after a Hogmanay when they're not able to go out and see people as usual maybe. So if you want to watch it back, or you want to watch any of the other films back, then please do so. You can see them all on YouTube on the Highlife Island channel. Before I start, just the normal introduction that I always do, to say to you that this series is brought to you by Highlife Island at no cost to the viewer, that Highlife Island is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part in the Learn with Lorna series. But if you're able to donate towards our work, please do so, and thank you so much to those of you who've already done that. It really is appreciated. I mentioned that I am the Community Engagement Officer for the Highland Archive Service. If you've been watching this series over the 41 weeks we've been doing it, you'll know that we have the 4 offices. So we have the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness, Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives in Wick, and Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William, and Skye and Lochalsh Archive Centre in Portree. And I've been trying to pull bits from different collections and from the different offices, and this week we're looking at one from the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness. Thank you so much to everyone saying hello and Happy New Year. It's so lovely to see you. I feel like I'm back with friends in the new year. So the Margaret MacDougall collection is D390, and as I have talked a little bit about deposited collections through this series, I thought I would just kind of stop and explain what that means. We have, as you will know, the records of official institutions like the Highland Council and the people who came before the Highland Council. And so we have their official records. We also have official records of big organisations such as NHS Highland, other Police Scotland, Highland records, things like that, historic records. And I've spoken before about business records and things like that, but we also have records of individuals, of people who, for whatever reason, have collected documentary items or their own diaries, letters, things like that, about their own life or about a subject that they were interested in or involved in. And we have those in all the offices too. And this collection is D390, which is the 390th deposited collection that we have taken in at the Highland Archive Centre. And altogether across the 4 offices, there are several thousand of these collections that have been given to us. And I know sometimes when people are watching these talks, I sometimes then get emails from people or phone calls from people who then come on to say that they might have items in their own family or in a business that they've been involved in, a club, things like that. I really hope this series inspires you to do that. If you have items in your house, in your family, in a curling club you're a member of, whatever it might be, connected to the Highlands, then please do get in touch with us, because we would love to hear from you and discuss maybe looking after those on your behalf. Quite a few people from everywhere: Hampshire, Northumberland, Shetland, all ends of the country, Czechia, all sorts of places. It's lovely to have you with us. So this is the Margaret MacDougall collection. This collection dates from 1840 to 1972, so it covers over 100 years. It comprises 5 boxes of documents and some outsized items as well. So who was Margaret MacDougall? Why is her collection important and interesting? Why have we kept it? She was one of 4 children. She was a native of Inverness, and she for work, was involved heavily in a lot of the institutions of the town. She was the Inverness County and Borough Librarian and also curator of Inverness Museum. And it's interesting to me, she's obviously someone who always had a huge interest in history and heritage, but those are both now Highlife Island functions. Highlife Island runs leisure and cultural facilities across the Highlands. So as well as gyms and swimming pools and things like that, we also run libraries, archive centres, museums. And so it's interesting to me that those functions she had, her collections now sit within the Highlife Island Archive Service, but also the places that she used to work and was attached to, Inverness Library and Inverness Museum, are both now within Highlife Island as well. And as such, with her role in those two organisations, she took a huge amount of interest, of course, in the history of Inverness and the wider Highlands. And she was a specialist on a variety of subjects, from a noted specialist in old silver, Inverness silver and silversmiths, and tartans, and a wide variety of things. So as you can imagine, with someone who's got this kind of very diverse interest in a lot of subjects, you can imagine that this is a very varied and diverse collection. And if you know anything about me by now, you'll know that that is the sort of collection I absolutely love, because there's just such a variety of information in it on all sorts of subjects, much like I spoke about in Fraser Tytler Week, another collection like that where you can go to and put your hand on a wide range of information. So I was going to say to you what's in the collection, but as I started to think about it, I thought, what's not in this collection? There's references to everything in this collection. There are records and documents, research notes and articles relating to all of the things she was interested in. As I said, she was a font of knowledge on all sorts of subjects and a respected authority on a lot of subjects. And often when I'm researching something for any purpose, to work with a school group or to write a newspaper article, whatever it might be, often I go into this collection to see, I wonder if Margaret MacDougall had already written about this or had already researched this, and that might give me some pointers or some interesting leads to follow. And often that pans out exactly in that way. So I thought I would pick just some of the things in the collection to talk to you about. She wrote about the history of street names in Inverness, research notes and articles on a wide variety of subjects, and I'll tell you about some of those in a second. Stuart, I'm seeing your question asking how you can donate. There is a link within this Facebook page in the body text of the video, a link to donate on there. But I can put it into the comments afterwards as well. Thank you. She wrote about information about organisations and buildings, the histories of schools and churches. She did something which I will be eternally grateful to her for, even though, of course, I will never meet her now, but she transcribed a lot of the borough minutes. So the Inverness borough minutes, I'll come on to it in a bit more detail in a second, but she went through those and wrote them out again, which of course makes them much easier to read. She wrote about tartans and clan badges. She collected clan journals. There are notebooks on every subject from witchcraft to tartan. She was the playwright and scriptwriter behind the Inverness Pageants in the 1950s, and she wrote publications and leaflets about Inverness, the history of the town, the history of different aspects of the Highlands. And so I'm going to pull out some of these things to tell you about. I wanted to start by talking about street names. Street names are something that are of great fascination to a lot of people, both locals and visitors to an area. So I'm going to talk about some of the street names in Inverness, and I'm aware that some of you probably will never have been here and may never be in Inverness. But I hope it just demonstrates the sort of things she was researching. And as I say, you can maybe look round where you live with different eyes and wonder where the street names came from. And of course, street names are something we see in the news a lot at the moment, as to what should be kept as a street name. Who are we venerating in those names? So here's some questions. If you're local, you might have wondered. Who was Baron Taylor of Baron Taylor Street? Where does Clachnahary get its name from? What is the history behind the Dempster Garden? And what was Castle Street called before it was Castle Street? There are so many examples I could have picked, but I want to tell you the answers to those 4 questions as written in her research notes, because I thought they were interesting ones people might have wondered about. It's fine, you're late, Andrea. Doesn't matter. You're very welcome. Join the body of the kirk. Okay, so Baron Taylor Street, which is right in the centre of Inverness. And she wrote in her notes, the old name of this was the Black Vennel, which is like a narrow lane. In a deed dated 1620, it is called the Common Vennel, leading from Kirk Street to the east. In another deed, it is called the Black Vennel. It was renamed after a Mr. John Taylor, merchant, who possessed considerable property in the Vennel, and purchased a superiority which enabled him to be enrolled amongst the barons. He was thenceforth always referred to as Baron Taylor, and the street became known as Baron Taylor Street. So there's examples of people who were notable in the town. Clachnahari are particularly, in different aspects of that word, represented in lots of places in Inverness, Clachnacud and things like that. And that's from the Gaelic meaning the stone of the watch. And it means that the watchers who were employed by the town were stationed here to give the townspeople warning of approaching danger. And that's the same derivation in the word Ballaferi. Dempster Gardens and Castle Hill are linked together, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about those. I don't know if any of you have done this, but if you're not from Inverness or haven't been to Inverness, it's worth having a wee look at a map, either a current or an old Ordnance Survey map, and picking out some of these places, because these places in the centre of our towns, all of our towns, are so often integral to all sorts of stories that have formed the place. So Dempster Gardens, it says previously the whole area around here was called Inch's Great Garden, and it belonged to the Inch's family, but it was renamed after a local Dempster who owned land here. Now, the Dempster, as some of you may or may not know, is another word for the hangman, and that's where we get the surname Dempster from. And Castle Street, you can see here as well, she talks about. The early name for Castle Street was Doomsdale. I love that word. I think that is such an atmospheric, expressive word. It was the roadway which led to the Gallows Hill. The Gallows Hill was approached via the Doomsdale to a point near the middle of the present Castle Street, where a small pathway branched off towards the gallows at Muirfield. So a feeling of people being led to their doom or to their fate. So it was Doomsdale, and then of course became known as Castle Street. So it just gives you some ideas of the sorts of things she was researching and the sorts of information that can be found by looking at something like street names. Information about places, information about influential local people, social history, cultural history, all sorts of things. And that kind of personifies or exemplifies all the things that she was interested in. She wrote research notes on a huge number of subjects, including buildings, and I've referred to some of these in previous talks. For example, the Reformatory and the Ragged School I've spoken about used her notes on that subject to start my research to talk to you about the Ragged School in response to the asylum records. So all of these collections link into each other all the time and add to our collective greater knowledge. So some of the things she had written articles about include, and I'm just going to reel them off because they're so interesting, the history of the steeple of Inverness, Inverness School of Art and Science, witches, fairies, kelpies and superstitions. Now, if you remember when I did last week's talk, I thought, as I did traditions and festivities, I thought, oh, there's definitely another one in there about superstitions, so I'll do that at some point. The town council, she wrote about the structure and the functions and the roles of the people within the town council, including the drummer, the postmaster of horse and the executioner. So again, a great place to start if you're interested in finding out what the kind of governing system was like at the time. She wrote a lot about schools and education, so some of the schools that we still know of today in the town, but also the music school, the dancing school, the mathematics school. So very specific places to go to look for information about different institutions. And subjects about the hangman and the end of flogging for women. And I'm going to read you two extracts from those. So bear with me, I'm going to read them off this screen. So don't be upset that I'm not looking at you anymore. Okay. So I wanted I thought about summarising her notes, and I thought the best thing will be for me to do is to read it in her writing. So she has written about the hangman here, which of course is something we haven't had for a long time, but it's something that always catches people's interest. In the early days, when the magistrates had power to sentence criminals to death, a dempster was employed to carry out the decisions of the court. Sentences included flogging, placing in the pillory in stocks, cutting off of thieves' ears, the torture of the thumbscrew, the boot, and other machines of suffering owned by the borough of the land, and considered as essential equipment for the good management of law and order. Later, the designation Dempster went out of use, and he became known as the executioner or the common hangman. Inverness possessed a Dempster from the earliest period of existing local records, and the appointment was a regular municipal expenditure until 1834. The neighbouring towns, such as Nairn, Forres and Elgin, did not regularly employ an executioner and frequently borrowed the Inverness man to carry out sentences of court. On one occasion, the Inverness hangman, who had gone to Elgin to carry out an execution, was murdered on the road home. The magistrates of Inverness thereafter decided that in future, any town asking for the loan of the executioner would require to send a guard for him and to have him returned by guard, ensuring his personal safety. At one point, the magistrates of Elgin asked Inverness for the loan of the Inverness executioner to carry out sentence of death on a murderer. A sufficient guard under sheriff officers in Elgin came to Inverness and took the hangman to Elgin, where his work was done to the satisfaction of the Elgin magistrates, and he was returned to Inverness under the same guard, having been amply rewarded for his labour. The letter of thanks from the magistrates contains the following. The last, so it goes on to write to say thank you for lending us your executioner. The last public hangman in Inverness was appointed in 1812 and continued in office until 1834, when he was dismissed in the interests of economy. During the 22 years of his employment, he had carried out only 3 executions, but his other duties had kept him fully employed. His salary was £16 per year plus emoluments. These were extensive and included a free house, bed and bedding, 36p weekly paid to him by the farmer of the petty customs, a bushel of coal out of every cargo of English coal imported to the town, a lump of coal as large as he could carry from every cargo of Scotch coal unloaded at the harbour, a peck of oatmeal out of every 100 balls unloaded at the shore, one fish from every creel or basket brought to the market, 1 penny for every sack of meal sold at the market, 1 peck of salt from every cargo imported, and other minor privileges. And his house was at the corner of the chapel yard, which is a graveyard in the middle of Inverness. A really interesting summary of the executioner's role, and interesting to note, she goes on towards the end of that article to say that it was a job nobody wanted, and nobody wanted to be the hangman, and so it was often people who were either going to be hanged themselves or were going to be banished that would instead be given the role of executioner instead. So as I noted at the beginning of that, the roles of the executioner include other punishments such as flogging. And I wanted to read to you an extract from Margaret MacDougall's notes about the end of the flogging of women. And again, I have that here on the screen to read to you. On the 7th of July 1817, an Act of Parliament styled An Act to Abolish the Punishment of Public Whipping on Female Offenders received royal assent and came into immediate effect. This act put an end to what had long been a cruel and inhumane punishment for what were often minor infringements of the law. For centuries, the public flogging of men and women was a common spectacle in most Scottish boroughs, and in earlier times as an accepted part of everyday scene on market days. So people could often, and there's lots of references to this within the town council minutes, they could be people could be whipped in the street for things like drunkenness, lying, thieving, forgery, things like that. But also if they had been sentenced to banishment from either the Highlands or from Scotland and had come back before their sentence was over, then they could be flogged in the street for that. And she continues, in Inverness, it was the custom to carry out all public floggings at noon on Fridays, market day, when there were more people on the streets to witness the zeal of the magistrates upholding the law. It is quite hard to believe that such things continued until 1817. There were many townspeople who protested, but as this punishment was part of the recognised process of law, they had no option but to comply with it. but a public outcry followed the flogging in March 1817 of a woman named Grant, described as a young and handsome woman who had been arrested for drunkenness and bad behaviour in the street. She was sentenced to flogging and banishment from the town. Within a fortnight of being flogged and banished, she returned, was arrested, reflogged, and rebanished. Thus, 3 times within the space of 2 weeks, she suffered 3 public humiliations for one crime. Even the most sadistically minded citizens considered this punishment too extreme, and the indifference of the prisoner to the public spectacle she created raised doubts as to the corrective value of such sentences anyway. And there was a whole, this was all written up in the local newspapers, so the Inverness Journal published a report of this woman's crime, the punishment that had happened to her. And newspaper described it as repugnant to feelings of respect and decency. And the copy of the newspaper was given into the hands of General Thornton, she says, a member of Parliament, who raised the matter in the House of Commons, and a bill for the abolition of public flogging of women was brought before the House. And he said that he had brought this forward in consequence of something he'd read in the Inverness Journal of a young, beautiful woman who had been flogged 3 times in the street. And it was the bill was passed, and hard labour was replaced. Flogging was replaced by hard labour. So that, as I say, this is the sort of thing you find in Margaret MacDougall's collection, just snippets of information that she has researched from within our original records and compiled them, and it's a very useful collection. Before I go on, a reminder that the series is brought to you by Highlife Island at no cost to the viewer, that Highlife Island is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series. And if you would like to donate, then I will put a comment in the comments when I've finished speaking. So, what else is in this collection? Well, as I mentioned, she is a fabulous woman because she transcribed handwritten extracts from the Inverness Town Council minutes. She did a volume of 1689 to 1720, and then 1720 to 1744, and then some extracts from other documents, from charters, petitions, things like that. And again, often these give you a route in to look in the collections in other places. I mentioned that she had written a lot of books, a lot of publications, leaflets, and information about Inverness, tourism, tartan, and other subjects. She wrote, as I mentioned at the beginning, the scripts for the Inverness Pageants. These were held in the 1950s in the Ness Islands in Inverness, the purpose being to tell the story of Inverness through the ages, what had happened in the town, the influence that the town had had on other places, and so on. And her script starts right back with Columba coming to Inverness, and then went right through to the present day. And they were written, we have her scripts for these, and also a leaflet that people would be given at the day, a programme that people would be given on the day. And these show her stage directions for groups of people coming in and playing the villagers during the Jacobite risings, and then going off, and then the next people coming on to be whatever it might be. And so even that kind of programme gives you an idea of the story of the town that she has compiled. And as I say, she wrote the narrations for them, the scripts, and the stage directions. She published a lot of articles. She wrote for newspapers, and a myriad of subjects that she wrote on, as you can imagine. And I wanted to read you an extract from a series that she wrote on local worthies. I'll read you the introduction to the series and then tell you some of the names that she wrote about. So the introduction, she says, in city, town, village and countryside, every generation is entertained by the doings, generally combined with the sayings, of a character. Mostly male, occasionally female, sometimes but not always native to the place. Their idiosyncrasies earn them an immunity from accepted conduct, and very often engender an affection from those acquainted with them. Genuine simplicity appeals to pity, and most of us feel that we are due the character something for introducing a coloured thread into the tapestry of our everyday lives. Therefore, without any malice, let's try and conjure back a few of the type occupying kindly niches in the memories of Invernessians. I just think that's really beautifully written, and it's such a perfect description of, a character whose idiosyncrasies earn them immunity from accepted conduct. And in that first article, she writes about someone called Jimmy and the Coachie. But I wanted to read you the names of all the worthies that she spoke about. I don't know if we have anyone watching who would remember any of these people, but if you do, please put a comment in. So she talks about Jimmy and the Coachie, John the Foreigner, Sally Come Up, the Maggot Poet, Joe Ho, Little Colin, Johnny the Dandy, 40 Pockets, who some of you may know, Ali Ronach, Jimmy the Roe, Cappy Eppie, and Trades Movin'. Fantastic series of names. And I wanted to read you the one that she wrote about Little Colin. She says, year by year, the internal combustion engine continues to oust the horse from the farm and delivery businesses, and horsemen sigh for the good old days. Not himself a copper, which apparently was a horse dealer, coper maybe, Little Colin was much sought after on sale days because of his understanding of the friend of man. Animals delivered to his care were certain to receive kind treatment at his hands. He was especially good with ponies and could quickly soothe the liveliest and the most nervous. He delighted in handling the pretty Shetlanders which were brought to the market, and many a head would turn at the clatter of tiny hooves on cobbles of the high street to watch Colin, mounted on one of the charges, leading the cavalcade to or from the mart. A little man with a big heart was Little Colin. Just a lovely series of articles about some of the people who make life a little bit more colourful. I mentioned that she was an expert on a specific expert on some subjects, including old silver and tartans, and we have information about all of these things within the collections. We have her papers about different types of tartans, about the sets, so it's the patterns of tartans, a mixture of her own notes on the subject, her correspondence with other experts, newspaper cuttings on the subject, and they're also, quite unusually for us, there are samples of tartan, samples of those fabrics within that collection as well. There are also pamphlets and leaflets that she wrote, for instance, Old Highland Tartans and 2 Centuries of Highland Dress are 2 examples. Lists of the Highland clans who were mentioned in the Acts of Parliament of 1587-1594. So again, a place to look for information, the list of clans mentioned specifically in Acts of Parliament. She wrote a pamphlet called The Romance of the Tartan, which is interesting because she also wrote an article called The Grim Side to the Romance of Culloden. So there's a realism there about the comparison of the romance of one thing, but the reality that can sometimes be hidden by the romance. She wrote about clan badges. She has copies of clan journals, information about specific clan tartans such as Macpherson, clan Hatton journals, things like that. And I wanted to round off just by telling you there are a few collections and photographs in this collection, not many, but there's notably one of David Lloyd George with a group of people. Now, David Lloyd George was the last Liberal Prime Minister of Britain from 1916 until 1922. And in 1921, he had held an emergency meeting of the UK Cabinet in Inverness. And his cabinet at that time included a lot of famous names, including Stanley Baldwin, Winston Churchill, both, of course, who would go on to become UK Prime Ministers. And he held this meeting in Inverness, and it remains the only UK Cabinet meeting that has ever been held outside London. David Lloyd George returned to Inverness in 1923 to be presented with the Freedom casket by the Corporation of Inverness, and a photo of that moment is in this collection as well. Margaret MacDougall passed away in 1960, well loved and well respected, as I say, a font of knowledge, but her legacy lives on, which is, that's really something we can all hope for. Her legacy lives on in her papers, and also, of course, to the likes of me, I go, this is a useful collection. This is a person who I can rely on because they've researched, and I take some hints from there and then I follow them up within the original records. It's a really useful collection. the records of individuals are really, really important. And I know sometimes people think that, but I didn't do all of that, or no one in my family was an expert on something. That doesn't matter. We have the collections of ordinary people and extraordinary people, and if you have anything in your house or in people that you know who might be willing to contact us about that, please do, because it all adds to the collective history of the Highlands and enables us to share them with you in things like this. The last thing I wanted to say before I head off and leave you alone is that we are moving into a new series of themed posts for 2021. So across our 4 Facebook pages for the 4 centres, we'll be running themed Facebook posts, this month being the theme of decades and living memories. Obviously, some of the things we've got in our minds to plan, it'll depend what happens with lockdowns, it'll depend where we are, but please do follow our 4 Facebook pages and see what we're doing and what we've got planned. Thank you again for joining me. I really appreciate it. And Stuart, I'm seeing that you've donated, so thank you so much for that. It's really appreciated. A reminder as I go that this series is brought to you by Highlife Island at no cost to the viewer, that Highlife Island is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part. But if you're able to donate, please do so. It's very, very much appreciated. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you can join me next week, next Thursday. Thank you.